Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Hawk Blogger, and it is July 3rd, the Wednesday before U.S. Independence Day, a couple days after Canadian Independence Day. Who knew? I didn't, to be totally honest, that they were so close together. Yeah, I don't even know. Do they have like a tea party story in Canada? Is it like a maple party or something like that? I don't know. But I am not a history buff. Maybe I'll become one as I get older and older. But as of now, I just know that the U.S. is turning another year older tomorrow. But today, Hawk Blogger Mornings is turning 101. This is the 101st episode. I think the only place that you can get daily Seahawks content every morning, weekends included, for your drive time into work, for your morning jog, for whatever you like to do in the mornings. I'm here to talk Seahawks with you. I had to start a little bit early today as I've got got to drive my kid into camp and whatever else is going to be going on. And so wanted to get this done. But we got a fun one today. Got a fun one. I don't know how much you guys listen to the Move the Sticks podcast, but I'm a fan. I really like Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks. I think they bring a good, reputable, credible perspective to their conversations about football. And for the most part, I'll caveat this because as I talk through some of the content for today, there's a little bit of an exception, but for the most part, I think they're pretty unbiased. They just kind of go through and have perspectives that they share from their expertise. And they have done what I think everybody does this time of year. They go through and they do some rankings, which is always fun to hear and react to and are meaningless, really, because, I think you could go back and rank things from last year pretty effectively, but we're really just guessing at what these teams are going to do and these individual units are going to do this year. Well, one of the services I'm going to provide for all of you is instead of you having to listen to a bunch of different versions of these podcasts that are out there and then find where the NFC West conversation is, I'm going to summarize it for you. I'm going to play some of the sound. I'm going to share with you what their rankings were, and we'll react together what we thought about these rankings. And usually you start with offense, and maybe we should, but I have to admit where I really want to start is on the defense. And so because that's what I feel like doing, I'm just going to do it. And the way that Bucky and Daniel did this, or DJ, as I think he likes to be called, is they broke down the defense into just two groups. They broke it into the front seven and secondaries, which is a nice little summary piece. But I do think it's important to understand that front seven is not just the defensive line. Obviously, it's not just the linebackers. It's all of them combined. It's edge, linebackers, defensive line. So that factors into the conversation. And then secondaries is the safeties and the three corners. And if you heard their conversation with Leslie Frazier, there was some great conversation about secondary play. I had an episode where I summarized some of that stuff a couple days ago. You should check out that episode if you've missed it. And we're going to go through right now and hear how Bucky Brooks and Daniel Jeremiah explained their positions on these different groups. Before we do that, it is a great time to take one moment, click the like button. I would really appreciate it. It helps the show grow and helps other people find the content. Subscribe to the channel. We are growing, pushing towards 11,000 subscribers. Would love to get there. Let's get there. Training camp somewhere around there would be great. Let's just keep growing. And also, great chance to promote our YouTube membership. So Eric Kinnaman here is a member. You can see the little emblem next to his name. He's wishing me a happy 101st episode, which I appreciate, Eric. And this little emblem highlights the name for me in chat. It also highlights it in comments on the YouTube channel so I can find you. And then there's other levels as well where you can get access to exclusive content. I will follow you on whatever social platform you prefer for me to follow you on if you're a suite level member, as well as if you're a club level or higher member, you get access to things like asking questions live during the show and things like that. So great chance to join as a YouTube member and also as a Patreon member, patreon.com/hawkblogger. That is where you get all the audio versions ad-free, equalized of all these shows. So as I'm going to be playing some sound, some of it may not be as loud or as clear. Once I get a chance to work with it in post-production, it will be crystal clear. And by the way, you don't have to, drain your battery on your phone as you're listening to YouTube as you walk around, as opposed to listening to the audio on patreon.com/hawkblogger. All right, let's get into it, folks. Front seven. I have to start there because I love defense and I love line play. And so I was very curious what Bucky and DJ did for this. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to reveal to you what Bucky did in his rankings and then DJ did in his rankings. And then I'm going to play you some sound from them about why they made the decisions that they made. So this first one with front seven, Bucky ranked the 49ers number 1. He ranked the Seahawks number 2. He ranked the Rams number 3, and he ranked the Cardinals number 4. Now, if I didn't explain this well enough, I should. They did not do these rankings across the NFL. They did it by division. So they did the NFC West in its own little capsule, and they ranked within, which I thought was kind of a fun way to do it. It's not as maybe controversial and hard as ranking 1 to 32, but still was informative. And the other piece that's worth just noting here is that I don't know if you guys get this as well, but the NFC West, it's the last one. It's the last one they cover. And when I'll do PFF probably as well. PFF, NFC West, almost always the last one they cover. When they do alphabetical order, the Seahawks are almost one of the last teams to cover. Why does that matter? It matters because you can tell they're in a little bit of a rush. They don't spend quite as much time, which always, janks me a little bit. But I think Bucky does a really nice job of taking his time and his explanations. DJ is a little bit more rushed, and I think it seems a little bit less invested. But again, Bucky goes San Francisco 1, Seattle 2, LA 3, and Arizona 4. I will be at the end of the show. I will show you a summary of all their rankings and the differences between their rankings. But for at least this initial part, I'm just going to talk you through the rankings, and then I'm going to play you the sound explaining how they came to that ranking. So this is Bucky Brooks explaining why he ranked the Seahawks second and the 49ers first, and that it was a tough call.
Cardinals. The battle between the San Francisco 49ers and the Seattle Seahawks, to me, is really interesting because I think Mike McDonald helps them close the gap. He helps them close the gap because of the work that we saw him do in Baltimore to turn guys like Calvin Noy into very disruptive and functional players. He has a better collection of talent at his disposal in Seattle. You just think about what they already had in terms of the players that were coming back. I don't think if people paid attention to what Boye Mafi was doing. Leonard Williams being a disruptive dude at the point of attack. And then DJ, getting Byron Murphy, being able to get him in the first round to throw him in the mix. And look, you know it because you've seen Chinua Nwosu before up close and personal when he's with they have some really good players. And I'm looking forward to seeing how he unlocks these guys in a different style of defense after watching what Pete Carroll was able to do for a long time. This would be different, but I think they can be just as impactful as those Legion of Booms teams were.
Well, that I think is a little bit of an overstatement, and he walks that back in a future episode, which I'll play for you in a bit. But for me, that was a great, credible conversation from Bucky Brooks that demonstrates that he is not just going with the status quo. He's not going with the national narrative. He is paying attention to what's going on. He brings up Boye Mafe, who I still think is someone that most people don't know across the league, aren't aware that he had 7 sacks in 7 games and 9 sacks in his second season. And, we'll talk more about Boye. He finally had, I think, the best interview I've heard from him with Chris Long a couple days ago, and I'll break up some of that sound. We'll play it another day. But I find that he's not the first person to say that he thinks Mike Macdonald has better personnel to work with in Seattle than he did in Baltimore. I don't feel that way. I don't know if I'm the only person that doesn't feel that way. I think maybe in certain places he does, but he had an all-pro, at least one, at every level of his defense in Baltimore. Now you could say, well, maybe Mike Macdonald was why they were all pros. But I think Kyle Hamilton is pretty special. I think Roquan Smith is pretty special. I think maybe you can make the case that Justin Madubuike would not have been, but still pretty special. So I'm not sure I'm ready to declare the Seahawks defense having more talent for Mike Macdonald to work with, but I do think that his defensive line has more talent to work with, and including his edge players and his defensive interior players. So that was Bucky Brooks explaining his reasons for why he had this really tough discussion between the Seahawks and the 49ers. DJ had the same number one, the 49ers. Then he had LA, the Rams, as number 2. Seattle is 3, Arizona 4. So he flopped LA and Seattle. And here was DJ's explanation about why he had that different.
So I changed it up a little bit there, and I hear what you're saying on Seattle, and I love Coach Macdonald, the scheme that they're going to run. They've got good pieces. I ended up going the Rams over them for the reason that I feel like this is kind of a sum is greater than the individual parts, and I feel like this is kind of a no-name type defense that unless you really watch them, and you saw last year with the young guys, you saw Kobe Turner. They had like 9 sacks. I mean, he was the best rookie rusher really. And then now you add in the 2 Florida State kids and Jared Verse and Brandon Fisk. I like both those guys. I think they add some temperament and some personality there to that front. And then off the ball, I look, Ernest Jones, a really good player. Byron Young, was a rookie last year as well, coming off the edge, who I think those are the two, you look at production, sack-wise, rookie-wise, that's as good as it gets. So they've got a bunch of young, hungry, athletic, talented guys in their front seven. So I would say if you're going to say right now, maybe Seattle's a little bit ahead of them. But I think over the course of the year, I think that the Rams, all these young players, that teaching staff that they have there, I think you're going to see a really, really surprisingly good defense in a front seven here with the Rams.
Yeah, I don't think that that's crazy. I wish I didn't, but I really like what the Rams have done with their roster. I mean, I think they have had a 2-year run in terms of adding talent to their roster that could rival some of the early Pete Carroll, John Schneider draft classes in terms of what they've added. I mean, they really have upgraded in a lot of places with high quality players very quickly. And it sucks. It really sucks, but they've done it. Where I disagree with DJ is I think this notion that the Rams are the only young group that's going to get better feels off to me. Boye Mafe is going to be in his 3rd year. He's going to be getting better. Derek Hall, who did nothing last year, but was a 2nd-round pick, could be something that improves this year. Darrell Taylor, who still, as much as we've got issues with him, has been a productive pass rusher. I don't think he's a 0, and who knows what he will do in Mike Macdonald's scheme. And then you've got guys like Tyrell Dodson and Jerome Baker, who I think are relatively lesser known, especially Dodson, who could, Dodson was the number 1 ranked linebacker in the NFL last year by PFF, and that was in half a season roughly. What if he does something in the top 10 this year? Forget number 1, but what if he's a top 10 backer this year? I think he's not necessarily assuming that's going to happen, but these are young guys that can be stepping forward. And of course, Byron Murphy, right? How can you not talk about Byron Murphy? Yes, Kobe Turner had a big year last year, but for me, Byron Murphy is, I think, a much, much more talented defender. So, in any event, I don't agree with DJ that it's clear the Ravens will just get better. And I think it's interesting that he acknowledges that if you look at it right now, the Seahawks are a little bit above. Where I give the Rams some clear edge in the front seven conversation is I think Ernest Jones is very, very good. I think he is the second best linebacker in the NFC West overall. He is very young. People forget how young he is. He's due for his next contract. It sounds like the Rams have decided, like Les Snead's been public about this, that he's not going to extend him before the season, which I think is very fascinating. Maybe Ernest Jones will be a guy that takes a huge drop after Aaron Donald's gone. I think anytime you lose a massive disruptor in the interior defensive line, it can absolutely affect your linebackers. But I think he is clearly better than what the Seahawks have at inside linebacker right now. Maybe that changes during the year. I think that's possible. But in any event, I don't like Brandon Fisk that much. I think he is a combine hero. I think he is a mediocre defensive tackle who's undersized, and I think that will show up during the year. I really like Jared Verse, as you all know. So, I like Verse, Young, Turner. I think Fisk is overrated and will struggle a little bit, but we'll see. I think that Bobby Brown is their nose tackle. I like him quite a bit as well. So they've definitely got the young group that can grow together. And in 3 years, that might be the best front seven in the NFL. It's possible. I don't want to admit it, but it's possible. But right now, I would have the Seahawks ahead of the Rams. And depending on what happens with the 49ers, Dre Greenlaw's recovering from his knee injury. I am not convinced that defensive line for the 49ers is anywhere close to as good as people think it is. Now, maybe this will look really stupid come the regular season, but I think that defensive line is going to be gashed against the run. And while everyone gets excited about Nick Bosa and his pass rush, I'm not as big a believer in Leonard Floyd as other folks are. I think he's aging. I think he's declining. I think he is an awful run defender. And so now you have 3 of the 4 defensive linemen as bad run defenders. And you've got, backup linebacker, playing next to Fred Warner. Is Fred Warner going to hold up when the defensive tackles in front of him are not? I don't know. So I have more questions there. I don't think it's crazy. I could have easily made the argument that it's the Seahawks that are just maybe a hair below the 49ers right now, but could midway through the season overtake them in the front seven. Anyway, so front seven, fun to hear. And I think a fair conversation, nothing particularly crazy from either DJ or Bucky on that one. Next, we go to the secondaries. And the secondaries, Bucky has the Seahawks number 1. He has the 49ers number 2. He has the Rams number 3, and he has Arizona number 4. Let's hear Bucky's explanation for why he came to that conclusion.
Mix is Leslie Frazier was very optimistic about what they have in Reek Woolen. And I'm optimistic in not only Reek Woolen, but how about Devin Witherspoon and what he brings to the table with Julian Love. And I know Rayshawn Jenkins. We both know Rayshawn Jenkins personally. Look, he's a playmaker. And so you put him in a defense that is going to allow him to have some freedoms to go get after the ball and just go make plays. They're going to do it. This team in Seattle, look, it's not the Legion of Boom, but they certainly are going to be a lockdown unit in the back end.
So you hear him change his mind about them being like the Legion of Boom from the front seven conversation to, hey, they're not going to be the Legion of Boom, but they're going to be locked down in the secondary. I also loved there from Bucky that he talked about Rayshawn Jenkins and Dan Jeremiah. If people don't know, part of his background in the NFL is working as a scout. He worked closely with the Eagles, but he also worked with the Chargers for a while. And so he has familiarity. Rayshawn Jenkins started out with the Chargers. So he kind of infers there that both DJ and Bucky are fans of Rayshon Jenkins, and talked about the fact that he thinks he's going to make a ton of plays in this defense. We had Coach Cody Alexander on as well, and he also is very high on Rayshon Jenkins and what he'll be able to do in this defense. I think that continues to be one of the most underrated, undertold stories in terms of areas that could be really drastic upgrades in the NFL, let alone just within the Seahawks. And good to hear that from Bucky Brooks. He also talks about that Leslie Frazier, that interview. He just talked about how Leslie Frazier talks so much about Tariq Woolen and how important that could be. As a matter of fact, in this case, DJ almost was the same. He did have the Seahawks number 1, which is cool. He had the 49ers number 2. He had Arizona number 3 and LA number 4. The Arizona number 3 is kind of fascinating to me because I think the Rams, a lot of people don't like the Rams secondary, but I mean, they signed Cam Curl, drafted Cam Kitchens. Russ Yeast is not a bad player. They signed Darius Williams and Tre'Davious White. Now, those guys, maybe their best years are behind them, but I don't know that that's a bad secondary. And I feel like I look at the Cardinals and I'm like, that's a lot of young guys that you're counting. I like Jalen Thompson. I think Budda Baker has been declining and injured. I love Budda Baker, but I think he is definitely on the decline from my perspective. And their corner room is, I got a lot of questions, but you'll hear from DJ why he feels differently about the Cardinals.
Rams 4, 3 and 4 to me was really, really close. And I ended up going with Arizona. A couple reasons here. I love the young guys that they have. Max Melton was one of my favorite players out of Rutgers they got in the second round. Again, they had so many draft picks. When we go through all these position groups, they're going to rely on a lot of these rookies. But he's in the mix. You got Taylor Demerson, who they got in the fourth round, who can make a lot of plays in the back end. We'll see if he can get in the mix there. Elijah Jones, Jaden Davis, a couple more rookie corners. Budda Baker feels like he's been in the league for 100 years. Still, it's just 17 when he came to the league, but it feels like so much longer than that. But I like their good young pieces there. Garrett Williams, a talented nickel out of Syracuse that they got in the third round. So in the previous year. So I think them and the Rams, I think the benefit of that is they've got two really good teaching staffs. They've got a lot of young players. And we'll see, how they continue to grow and develop. Also, a big fan of Quentin Lake, who we got to know a little bit in the offseason when we got a chance to visit with him. I think that's a big year for him with the Rams as he kind of emerges as a good young player to go along with Cam Kitchens, who they got in the third round. So, again, very close there. But I do think there's a gap between the first two, Seattle, San Francisco. And then I think after that, you can play around with the Cardinals and the Rams in terms of who you like better.
One thing I wasn't clear about there when he said there's a gap between Seattle and San Francisco, I'm not sure if he kind of implied there's a gap between Seattle and San Francisco. I'm not sure that's what he meant. I would hope that maybe is what he meant, but I think he was talking about that Seattle and San Francisco are kind of in a class of themselves. And then these other two, the Rams and the Cardinals, are kind of fighting for what's behind. But in any event, I think that's encouraging and cool to hear the recognition for the Seahawks secondary. Because we'll talk about PFF another day, but, PFF has, I think the 49ers is the second best secondary in the NFL. I mean, which to me is absurd on a number of levels. But for Bucky and DJ to have Seattle as the best secondary in the NFC West, it's a good place to be. And so what you really have there is, if that's just looking at defense, again, they did front seven and secondaries as their whole defensive outlook. Bucky had the front seven is second for Seattle and the secondary is first. If that's true, not a bad place to be. DJ had the front seven as third, and even he said it's probably starts out right now as second. So, debate whether you want to put him there or a third. But in any event, and he has the Seahawks secondary as first. So defensively, there's two knowledgeable scouts who've worked in the league who like the talent on the defense. And if that's even close to true, then Mike Macdonald should have some good things to work with, and we should see a really dramatic improvement. I will keep calling back to Sean McVay's first season with the Rams. He took a offense that was ranked 32nd in the NFL, and it was ranked first in the NFL the next year, his first season. That is not, I think, a realistic expectation for what Mike Macdonald will do with the defense. But is it possible that he could take it from a bottom, 27th, 28th ranked defense to a top 10 defense? I do think that's possible. I think that that's possible. And it would be a massive, massive change to see the Seahawks defense play that well. Comment from one of our YouTube members, Braden Fisk. I've said Brandon a few times. Yeah, you can tell. I don't really like him that much. But yes, I appreciate. I'll probably keep messing up his name from time to time. I appreciate the correction, and will try my best to get it right. I will just call him not as good as people think. That defensive tackle that's not as good as people think from Florida State. All right, let's move to the offense, shall we? Let's do that. And there we are going to talk about quarterbacks first. And in that regard, Bucky has San Francisco first. I thought this would be identical for both. Bucky surprised me a little bit. Bucky went San Francisco first, LA second, Seattle third, and they did the names. So they basically did Purdy first, Stafford second, Geno third, and Kyler Murray fourth. And you should have seen Daniel Jeremiah's face when he said Kyler Murray fourth. I loved this from Bucky Brooks. And I think he'd be one of the few people that do this, but I 100% agree. Here is him explaining his decision.
Ooh.
That has a little more probably bite and controversy towards it, but I'm okay. Brock Purdy, I'm going to say this. Brock Purdy, because of the way that he entered the league, and even in watching him at the East-West Shrine, I just didn't know what he was going to be down the line. Goes to the right situation, right spot, and really displays all the characteristics and the tangibles that make you fall in love with quarterbacks. He has that. He's an easy thrower. He has more athleticism people give him credit for. He got some spunk to him, some dog to him that really enables his teammates to fall in line. And when I look at him and Matthew Stafford, I just believe Purdy gets so much more out of his people on offense and defense because of his personnel.
So all that conversation was about Purdy and Stafford, and I'll just admit, I think Matt Stafford is a significantly better quarterback than Brock Purdy. And I'm actually someone who has been a Purdy believer since his rookie year and been concerned about it and predicted going into last year, I predicted in preseason that he would lead the NFC. He would be the best quarterback in the NFC from a passing touchdowns perspective. I can't remember if he actually pulled that off or not, but I know that he had a season that was not surprising to me and was surprising to a lot of people. So I definitely see Brock Purdy, I think, for what he is as a talented play caller and a young one. But Matt Stafford, I mean, over the next 3 years, 100% Brock Purdy. Right now, I mean, Stafford was one of maybe the best passing quarterback in the NFL during the regular season. Yes, Patrick Mahomes is amazing, but Patrick Mahomes did not have a great regular season behind what was a challenged offensive line at time with receivers that were dropping passes, and that offense was not clicking. Certainly he proved himself as he always does in the playoffs, but Matt Stafford, he made some of the most absurd throws and had some of the best games of any quarterback in the NFL last year. So I would have Stafford as a better quarterback than Brock Purdy. And, Geno isn't in that conversation yet. And he's not like last year, even though I think there's a lot of reasons to believe last year was a much better year than people give him credit for. It's a year that needs to be defended. It's a year that needs data to support it. It is not undeniable. And he needs to have one of those years to be in that conversation. And frankly, I think this discussion that Bucky has about, hey, I think Brock Purdy gets more out of his supporting cast. one, he's had a better supporting cast. He's had one of the best, if not the best, supporting cast in all of the NFL, and he's got a great, OC that knows how to utilize all those guys in ways that really accentuate. So I give more credit to Kyle Shanahan for how Brock Purdy's able to utilize his supporting cast than I do Brock Purdy. But in any event, I don't really care that much, to be honest. But that was where they were. DJ was more chalk. He was San Francisco, so he was Purdy, Stafford. He went Kyler Murray, and then Geno Smith. Here is him explaining his reasoning.
Personnel.
Yeah, I just go with efficiency, and I don't think anybody's more efficient than Brock Purdy in terms of decision making, accuracy, finding explosive plays. I'm over this. We're past it now. He's been to the Super Bowl. We're past giving all the praise to supporting cast, play caller, playmakers, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Like that stuff's over. He's established himself as a really a top tier quarterback. So I'm going to go Brock Purdy 1, Stafford 2. I went Kyler 3. Hoping now, especially with Marvin Harrison Jr. in there, having some weapons to work with. I think Kyler Murray's due healthy. He's due for a big year. And then Geno Smith there. New coaching staff coming in. Some adjustment there. We'll see how Geno plays there. You got to remember Sam Howell obviously has entered the building too. So he's going to have to keep playing at a high level or they might get a quick look-see at Sam Howell at some point in time. So we're on the we're on a
Interesting there, the last comment. DJ in general, you'll get this throughout the rankings here. Pick up that he's just not quite as high on Seattle. Bucky is higher than most people nationally on Seattle, and it shows up in his rankings. He consistently, and you'll see this when I summarize the rankings for you in a bit, he consistently has Seattle a little bit higher in some of these position groups than DJ does. There's not a single situation where DJ has Seattle higher than Bucky on any of these position groups. And you hear like the tone of his voice talking about Geno, not a believer. He's like, yeah, Geno's doing all right. New coaching, maybe that'll be better. And then, Sam Howell's in there. If he doesn't play great, Sam Howell, like DJ's pretty tepid about Geno Smith. And I'm saying like, bring it, because I continue to believe in Geno Smith. And will continue to believe in Geno Smith until he gives me solid reason not to. And there was at one point, middle of last season, where I was like, Geno is broken. I tweeted it out. And then he led a great drive or something and won the game. But he had a stretch of a few games where he was really bad and making some really poor decisions. But ultimately, I still see the player that has the potential to be one of the best quarterbacks in football and certainly good enough to lead this team where it needs to go if he can get some help from his offensive line, from his offensive coordinator, from his receivers, and so forth. So let's see what Geno Smith can do with a decent run game, let's hope, with decent protection. And, we'll see. We will see. That's what's coming up in the next few weeks. We're going to start to get a lot more information about this. All right. Last two groups on the positions, at least, we'll get into. Next is running backs. And Bucky had the 49ers as first, Christian McCaffrey being a big reason. He had the Rams as number 2. He had Seattle as number 3 and Arizona as number 4. So as you're picking up here, these guys have Arizona last in a lot of these categories. So let's hear Bucky explain how he came to this running back ranking.
Christian McCaffrey is the trump card. He is as special as they come. I think we were on the front end of talking about how they could put him on the year-to-year extension thing to make sure he gets paid his value and his worth for what he brings to that offense. So that's there. But the offense that I'm excited about, the Rams, Kyron Williams and Blake Corum, DJ, I'm talking about a young combination of backs that, I mean, they are almost like the same player, except one is more explosive than Kyron Williams. But the physicality, the toughness, the way the Rams are moving to more of a gap scheme offense, both of these backs can be dynamic and explosive in this scheme that Sean McVay is employing.
So yeah, they pretty much talking a lot about the Rams, and I think a lot of people are pretty excited about the Rams and Kyron Williams, and now the addition of Blake Corum. I wouldn't say I'm excited, but I'm a big believer in what they did on the offensive line. They didn't. Interestingly, Bucky and Daniel did not do an offensive line rankings. If they were to, I think I would take the Rams number one, even though Trent Williams is down there in San Francisco. The collection of that offensive line, I like the youth and the girth of the interior of that offensive line for the Rams, that it's going to, I think, blow people off the ball in the run game and be good at protecting their passer as well. The tackles, certainly, not great, but not awful either. Alaric Jackson was essentially, he equaled the production and play of Charles Cross. So not great, but he was not like just an absolute train wreck. And Havenstein's I think definitely a better right tackle than who they're running out in San Francisco with McKivitz. So I think the Rams offensive line is quite good. And I think that matters to me when you're talking about running backs as much as anything else. The Seahawks, they don't have necessarily the same story to tell. We'll see what happens with Christian Haynes, with Anthony Bradford. We'll see what happens with Laken Tomlinson. We'll see what happens with Oluwatimi. But it has to be a see what happens. Anyone that says, oh, no, you're getting it totally wrong, I don't actually hear anyone saying that, because there's just no way. The Seahawks have been one of the worst offensive lines for years. And until they prove on the field differently, nobody should be claiming the Seahawks are anything but one of the worst offensive lines in football. That's just the reality until something changes. Daniel Jeremiah actually had the same rankings for running backs. I'm not going to play his sound. It's pretty much the same stuff. They don't talk about anything with the Seahawks, so I don't think it's worth going into. I'm going to backtrack for a second because Josh Cashman has said that DJ doesn't know ball. I'm guessing this is related to the Kyler Murray piece. And I think you mean Bucky Brooks, Josh, because Bucky Brooks is the one that had Geno Smith over Kyler Murray. DJ actually had Kyler Murray over Geno Smith. But maybe you're thinking something else, but I'm guessing that's what you're talking about. All right, let's keep going. Next, wide receivers. Rankings in the NFC West. Bucky has the Seahawks as number 1, the 49ers as number 2, the Rams as 3, and Arizona as 4. I thought this was kind of interesting because let's listen to what Bucky has to say about how he came to this ranking of the Seahawks as the best receiver group in the NFL, or in the NFC West.
4 is DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and JSN. Just the individual and the collective abilities of these guys sets them apart from the rest of the group. DK Metcalf is still a big play specialist. Tyler Lockett continues to be a guy that is like a reliable chain mover. And then DSN kind of growing and being groomed to be the number 1 receiver on the perimeter. In time, he's going to take the baton from Tyler Lockett and kind of become a bigger contributor, a bigger force on this offense. That's why I'm going to go with the Seattle Seahawks as the number 1 unit.
I found that pretty fascinating. And I think I've said this when I was on with Jeff maybe earlier. I don't know when it was, but every time they talk about Tyler Lockett as, this great receiver, last year really shook my confidence. I wouldn't even say it shook my confidence. I lost my confidence in Tyler Lockett as being the Tyler Lockett we've known and loved as a receiver. I think he really fell off last year as a deep threat. He dropped more passes. It doesn't mean he wasn't valuable. I mean, you watch the game-winning drive against the Titans, and it's Tyler Lockett time and again making these key third down catches that are great routes and savvy plays. And I think he's still got that in him. But am I really thinking that if I put him up against Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel or Yeah, I don't know that he's really competing with either of those guys for quality of receiver at this point. Now, you're going to hear from Dan Jeremiah. He is flipped. He has the 49ers first, and you'll hear him talk about why. Interestingly, like, I kind of agree with him and I kind of don't, but let me play his sound so you can hear for yourself.
You that too much. I'll just say this: if you think about it from a wrestling standpoint, you got a 3-on-3 match. Metcalf, Lockett, Smith, and Jigba. It's a great trio you just referenced. Ayuk, Debo, and Ricky Pearsall, the rookie. That's a really good trio there. The reason why I went with the Niners 1 and the Seahawks 2 is because the fourth man into the ring was Jawan Jennings, and I don't think that Seattle has him. So I'm going to say that 4 is better than Seattle's 3. But that's a good discussion. I think they're both excellent groups. I have it San Francisco 1. I have Seattle 2. I have the Rams 3, as you did, with a great combination there with Puka Nacua, and hopefully Cooper Kupp stays healthy, and we get to see what he can do, and some other interesting pieces there in that room. And then the Arizona Cardinals at 4. I was tempted, man. I couldn't do it just because of what Puka's done and what Cooper Kupp production-wise has done through his career. I'm bullish, though, on the Cardinals receiver group. I like that room that they've built there. I think Michael Wilson's got a chance to be a really good player. And then you add Marvin Harrison there. That is a nice 1-2 punch. It's a great combination with those two young guys.
Yeah, so I think here at first I was like, wrestling is a weird thing to use 3-on-3. Like, that's not the wrestling I knew, but I think he's talking like WWE wrestling, not Greco-Roman wrestling. Anyway, interesting, a couple things there. One, that he had Ricky Pearsall as 3. Ricky Pearsall is not their third receiver. I will be shocked if Jawan Jennings is their third receiver. And I think he's earned being their third receiver. He's one of, if not the best blocking receiver in the NFL. He's also very clutch, makes big catches in big moments. He plays with attitude, plays with physicality. Ricky Pearsall hasn't proven anything. So I don't know why he would be their third receiver all of a sudden. Maybe I'll be surprised by that, but that's how I'm expecting it to play out. But Pearsall is 4. And that is where I think where DJ's right on this is, well, where DJ's right is if you compare fourth receiver to fourth receiver, right now the Seahawks fourth receiver is Jake Bobo. As much as we all love him, I think Bobo is still a somewhat limited receiver who can be a really quality part of a receiving core. I think Jawan Jennings maybe is a good model for what Jake Bobo could be. Someone who is a terrific blocker, someone who is physical, someone who makes clutch catches. I think Jake Bobo can be something like Jawan Jennings, but has not proven that yet. The other thing that I wanted to bring up, and I'm going to actually look at this just to double check. I've talked to you all about how targets were distributed last year for the Seahawks. I mean, the fourth most targets for a receiver last year on the Seattle was Jake Bobo. He had 25 targets. So if you then go to San Francisco, I'm curious, who got the fourth most targets as a receiver on San Francisco last year? Well, Ayuk led them with 105. Debo had 89. Jawan Jennings had 33 as their third receiver. So he had basically the same amount of targets as Jake Bobo did as the Seahawks' fourth receiver. And their fourth most targeted receiver was Ray McLeod with 15. So I kind of call BS on this notion that the way you judge the receiver group is the four versus 4. I don't buy it, because ultimately I don't think those guys are going to matter. I think what you heard from Bucky Brooks is DK Metcalf's the best of the group. I don't actually agree with that. I wish I did. I think Brandon Ayuk is the best of the group. But DK Metcalf is certainly the most physically gifted of the group. There's no doubt about that. And maybe this is the year that he proves that he should be the first of that group. I don't think it's crazy that he could ascend to that, but I don't think based on history you can say that. And And so I do think the top two matter a lot. And for the Seahawks to really compete with the 49ers in that category with Ayuk and Debo, I think it's more about JSN than anybody else in this conversation. I think JSN has the potential to be the number one receiver on the Seahawks. I don't think he necessarily will be, but I think he has the potential to be. That's the expectation level I've got. I've got very high expectations for JSN, and I do think that he can become like he can pass Tyler Lockett this year. Even if Tyler is still good, I think JSN can be the better player this season. And if that happens, and unless Tyler Lockett takes a huge step back, I think you can make a pretty strong case that the Seahawks have a better trio of receivers, and that as far as what matters, that matters more. And then we'll see. Jake Bobo's going into his second year. A lot of guys make big jumps the second year. Maybe I'm underestimating it. Maybe other people are underestimating it. Maybe he is going to be a bigger part of this offense. Maybe he'll be a Joe Jaravicious, type of guy that can really impact the game despite not being the best athlete. So we'll see. But interesting to hear where they've got him. And interesting, like DJ talking about that Arizona receiving group. A lot of people are high on Michael Wilson. I know Doug Baldwin pre-draft last year was very high on Michael Wilson. And we'll see how he goes with Marvin Harrison Jr., because it could be a year from now that everybody's pretty clear that Marvin Harrison Jr. is the best receiver in the division. That's not out of the question. And the fact that Puka Nacua wasn't really in that conversation for best receiver in the division, we'll see. Josh Cashman says, one word, D. Eskridge. Josh, those are 2 words, but thank you very much. Thank you for being a YouTube member and supporting the show. Peter Jacobson, hopefully I'm now pronouncing that correctly, says, will JSN lead the team in yards and touchdowns? This is because Corey Coleman said that JSN will lead the team in receptions. I do not believe he will lead the team in yards. I think DK will lead the team in yards. I do not believe he will lead the team in touchdowns. I do believe DK will lead them in touchdowns. But I don't think it's going to be, I mean, is it possible that JSN has 8 touchdowns this year? Yeah. Double his touchdowns? Absolutely. I did a show on predicting JSN's second year statistics based off of a lot of other second year receivers and what they did and their climbs from first to second year. And yeah, touchdowns are actually the number that went up the most from rookie year to second year. I think JSN could go from 4 to 8. Absolutely. In his second season. All right. So we've done QBs, running backs, and wide receivers. The last thing was coaches, and they ranked head coaches. Bucky had the Rams. He had Sean McVay first, Kyle Shanahan second, Mike McDonald third, and whatever his name, Jonathan Gannon fourth. I barely taken the time to learn that guy's name. I have his face emblazoned in my head. It's like the most awkward looking guy and where he delivers his lines. I have that very clear in my head, but his name has not yet been worth remembering. So hopefully I got that right. DJ has Kyle Shanahan first. Do I have that right? Did he have Kyle Shanahan? I think he did. Kyle Shanahan first, McVay second, Gannon third, and McDonald fourth. So let's hear Bucky Brooks explain how he came to his head coach rankings.
Sean McVay versus Kyle Shanahan.
That's which one?
Which one? But I give the nod to Sean McVay because I feel like Sean McVay has been able to rework and rebuild the organization on the fly. The job that he did last year with the Rams is really amazing. It was amazing because we talked about this team being in a rebuild, and they found a way to win in a rebuild. Yes, you had Matthew Stafford, you had a franchise quarterback, a Super Bowl winning quarterback, but you had a bunch of youngsters around the quarterback. And being able to do it, I think he has a very clear sense of what he wants and a player and what they want to be as a team. And I'll say this, to be able to shift gears offensively, because this is not the offense that he ran a few years ago when he was running wide zone and they were doing all the complements from condensed formations. They've morphed into being a gap team, a more physical team, and he's done it different. To me, good coaches find a way to adapt and adjust and kind of build around the personnel that they have, or they build a team to meet the needs of the trends in the league. Sean McVay's done that. And that's me saying I love what Kyle Shanahan has done. We talked about the system, but to me, Sean McVay is just a notch ahead of Kyle Shanahan as a head coach.
I think Bucky Brooks just again demonstrated why I think he's one of the best out there. I really do. I think his thought process, his structured thinking, I think is top notch. And I don't even know why I understand Kyle Shanahan's incredibly talented. And for years, I had Kyle Shanahan clearly above Sean McVay. But there's two things that have changed that have given me more respect for Sean McVay. And that is, one, he won a ring. I think he is incredibly lucky to have won the ring he won. I'm not sure that in any other year he would have won that ring. I'm actually pretty sure he would not have won that ring if either Mahomes and the Chiefs or Josh Allen and the Bills had made it to the Super Bowl instead of Joe Burrow and the Bengals. I will never forgive the Bengals and Joe Burrow for doing that. But he does have a ring. And to me, that matters. And Kyle Shanahan has had chances, including last year, and he has blown 10-point leads every time he's had a chance at a ring. I think that matters. Other people will say, oh, that's one game. I think it absolutely matters. The other is, I think, maybe even equally important, which is Sean McVay came in as a head coach to the Rams, and he had his simple scheme, his wide zone scheme on the runs. He had the end arounds, all this kind of stuff that he was doing. It was a very horizontal stretch offense. And he took the league by storm, and everyone tried to copy it. They took all his assistants. Everyone was running that offense all of a sudden, except, of course, Shane Waldron, who came here and couldn't run an end around to save his life. In any event, he has changed. He has changed his scheme. I think the fact that he had no other options when he got to the Super Bowl against Bill Belichick, and Bill Belichick just schooled him in his Super Bowl matchup, because his offense is while it is effective, it's been very simple and very predictable. He's changed to a gap scheme power running game. He has taken a team that was the most talented roster in the NFL, stripped it down to its bare parts, and now has gotten new talent. Now, that's not all him. Obviously, Les Snead is part of that. But if you heard Sean McVay pleading for Byron Murphy, you know that Sean McVay's had a hand in these selections along the way as well. And he was going to retire. They were no longer good. It wasn't clear whether he wanted to spend time really, building it back up. But he stuck with it and has taken a new set of talent and started to build with it. I have so much more respect for that than what he did the first time, when he took what was he already had Aaron Donald. He already had, who was their left tackle back then? I want to say Joe, start with a J, something. Anyway, they had their left tackle. They had, they ended up they had Jared Goff, but they got Matt Stafford. So they had all of this talent already there. They had, anyway, it doesn't matter. They had a very talented roster. He is now building from scratch, essentially, other than Matt Stafford, which is a big deal. And they were a playoff team last year. They had no business being a playoff team last year. So I think that alone gives Sean McVay the edge over Kyle Shanahan. But yeah, Kyle Shanahan clearly deserves a lot of credit as well. Now, Dan Jeremiah, I think if I got this right, has Kyle Shanahan first, then McVay. So he flops that, but he has Gannon third and Mike Macdonald fourth. Here is what he has to say about that, including his thoughts on Macdonald.
3 and 4. But to me, really, that came down to style, preference, personality, more so than any X's and O's, accomplishment, managing a game, things like that. I think Kyle Shanahan is incredibly smart, and I think his teams have an edge to him, which I love. And that's why he's, one of the 5 best coaches in the NFL. I think McVay does things super smart, but with just a different energy. I'm buying in more on the energy, the positivity, all those things. I think that's conducive to all different types of teams, whether you got a young team, you got a veteran team. You go through hard times if you have to. I think he's somebody who can pull you out of that. So to me, more personality driven, more so than anything else. But I mean, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. They're both fantastic coaches.
Look, they're great coaches, and they're able to do it within their own style. And I credit McVay and some of the others from being able to take things from Kyle Shanahan, but then add to it. They do it. They're not clones of like their mentor, but they found a way to do it. And Shanahan, the things that DJ you mentioned in terms of building a team that is edgy, I think you need to have an opportunity to watch them practice to really understand how this team is a little different than other teams. I mean, they physically beat up opponents. And when you watch them in practice, I mean, look, without getting them in trouble saying it's a violation, I don't know if I've seen a more physical team when it comes to practicing without pads. They just operate at a different level. And I think what's telling is I went to Minnesota, and in training camp in Minnesota, they were still talking about their joint practices with the San Francisco 49ers and how it was eye-opening in terms of the level that they needed to get to be the team that they want to be.
Yep, no doubt. It's again, there's no wrong answer between those two. All right, we have the tab.
So he didn't really get into why he picked Gannon over McDonald, but what I gathered from I'm guessing a little bit. So Gannon coming from Philadelphia, where I think Jeremiah has some ties. My guess is that's where it comes from. But I am starting to get this feeling from a few places. I'm going to try to get Robert Mays back on the show because I was listening to one of his pods recently, and I just get there's a lot of people that are not as high on Mike Macdonald as I am, and I think a lot of us are. They're not like down on him. They're not like he's bad. But I think there's some skepticism. I think there's some skepticism of how good he's going to be. I think there's some skepticism of how quickly he will be good, whether it will take some time for the team to really adopt his scheme. So I think there's a little bit more out there of that than I would have expected, because for my money, he was the best coach available on the market this year. And the reason that the reasons other teams didn't hire him, but for me, there's no other coach I would have rather had as the new head coach of the Seahawks than Mike Macdonald. So we'll see. We will see about that. Let me give you the summary of all these rankings. Before I do that, I'll scroll back. I think there's been a conversation going on in chat about receivers. Again, Josh Cashman says he thinks Derek Young is being slept on, and that he's being serious about that. What I just say there relative to the receiver group is, jokes aside, let's say D. Eskridge does finally realize his potential. What does that even look like? Is he taking snaps away from JSN? I don't think so. Is he taking snaps away from Tyler? Maybe, if Tyler really falls off or is hurt. Is he taking snaps away from DK? No way. And so then you're already getting into kind of likely fourth receiver. So maybe Bobo snaps. Sure, maybe. But I think you're starting to thin slice things so much. And that's if D. Eskridge is good. If Derek Young is good. What I like about Derek Young in this offense is that I think he can be a runner. I think he can be a physical runner from that receiver spot. And I think that that's appealing. And so I don't know, like there might be packages where he can be an impactful player. But it may not always be about getting targets. It may be about blocking. It may be about taking an end around. It may be about other things. But every year I've made the mistake until a few years ago where I finally learned, like, beyond the third receiver, it almost just doesn't matter. Like that fourth receiver, there's a couple games where they'll factor in, but for the most part, it just they just don't get enough. There's not enough volume to actually get down to where the fourth or fifth receiver, especially, is going to impact. So let me share with you the full. Let me share with you the full rankings so you can see this for yourself. All right. So this, what's the best way to do this? Let's do it this way. All right. This is that's not going to work. Let me change to where I am out of your way. Whoops. All right. This is, my goodness, what a problem. Okay. This is the summary of the rankings from Bucky Brooks. On offense, you see he's got the 49ers number 1 for quarterback and running back. He's got the Seahawks number 1 for wide receiver. He has got the Seahawks number 3 for quarterback and running back. He has got on defense, he has the front 7 as 49ers first and Seahawks second. He called that a close one. And he has the Seahawks as the number 1 secondary. Okay. For head coach, he's got the Mike Macdonald as 3rd. If you look at Daniel Jeremiah, I've kind of highlighted where he's got some differences. He has the Seahawks as Geno Smith as the 4th out of 4 quarterbacks in the NFC West. He has the wide receiver group down 1. He has them as 2nd. He has on the front 7, he's got the Seahawks down 2. He's got them as the 3rd best front 7. And as head coach, he's got Mike Macdonald as 4th, which is down 1. So in all cases, Dan Jeremiah is a little more bearish and Bucky Brooks is a little more bullish. And if I'm being honest, I think the truth of the matter is Bucky Brooks is more bearish, because I think if you talk about the chalk perspective on the Seahawks across the NFL, I think Daniel Jeremiah is more in line with general expectations than is Bucky Brooks. Bucky Brooks, I think, is a little more bullish than the chalk. And so I happen to align with Bucky Brooks. I think his reasoning makes sense. And I think it also demonstrates he's paying a little bit more attention. But that's also coming from extreme bias on my side as a Seahawks fan. So that is it, folks. That is a look at all the rankings. I think in general, relatively fair. I think it's an incredibly competitive division with all sorts of variability built in. I think the 49ers have more variance in their outcome this year than they've had in a number of years. It's a thinner roster, more susceptible to injury, coming in with injuries already with Dre Greenlaw. People forget Tyler Hufanga is coming off an ACL. They're saying now he might not be ready for week 1. Don't know what's going to happen there, but in any event, he's coming off an ACL. Never know how that's going to go. You've got Eric Armstead's gone. Like, you just got a lot of variance, I believe, in that 49ers team that hasn't really been there. I think they were undeniable the last few years. I don't think that that's true this year. And then you got the Rams, one of the best young rosters in the NFL with one of the best quarterbacks and one of the best coaches offensively. They could win the division. They could finish 3rd. You've got the Seahawks, who nobody really knows what to expect in Mike Macdonald's first jump at head coach. Ryan Grubb with his first time in the NFL as an OC. Nobody knows what he's going to look like. Nobody knows what this receiver group. There's so much variability in that. And even the Cardinals, as much as their defense, I just don't think has what it takes to be a competitive team from a roster and talent perspective. That offense could absolutely jump out. Kyler Murray with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Michael Wilson and Greg Dortch and Trey McBride and all those guys, like they could absolutely. And I think the running back room is strong. James Conner and is it Trey Benson? I can't remember the Florida State back that they got in the draft. I think they've got some talent on offense, and they're going to give some teams trouble. So very competitive division. In some ways, I wish it wasn't, but in a lot of ways, it's going to be really interesting to see how these teams kind of battle out. All right, everybody, if you haven't given the show a like and click subscribe, what are you doing? Click like, click subscribe, help the show grow, have some more fun. It's more fun when there's more people watching. So help the show out. Join as a YouTube member. The link is in the description, and become a Patreon member. Patreon.com/hawkblogger will get you all the audio versions with no ads available to you to listen to. You won't regret it. Also gets you access to the Slack channel where there's great conversations going on, even now, about the Seahawks, about the Mariners, about all sorts of things. So come on in and join the crew. All right, everybody. I'm Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at HawkBlogger. This has been another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings.